Hey everybody, my name is Felix Lee, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you my Pyraminx method. I invented this method back in early 2010, I would say January. Back then I was averaging about 6.5, and within a year I got my average down to low 4s, high 3s, and that's when I got my NAR, which is which was sitting at 4.18, and it's currently my competition PB. This method revolves around Richard Patterson's method, better known today as Keyhole. So I've stopped practicing, so hopefully if you guys learn this, hopefully you'll start getting faster and faster and catching up to my times. And personally, I think this is a great method to start with if you're currently using a beginner's method and you want to slowly transition into what I guess the best Pyraminx solvers use right now. So I hope you enjoy.
Alright, so before we start, I'm going to go into the prerequisites that are required for this method. Like I said, my method revolves around the Keyhole method, so for those of you who don't know, how this method works is that we start off making, starting with a tip and attaching two edges to that tip, right? Now, we have this empty slot, and what we do with this is we orient the centers, so notice how the orange all goes on the bottom. So this center needs to go this way, the center needs to go that way, and the center needs to go that way, right? The next step is to solve this third edge, but that happened coincidentally. Normally you would bring it from the bottom up to the top. And then the last step is just to get all the rest of the three edges. Alright, so you need to be pretty comfortable with this method before you learn mine. I would say try to average around sub 8 before you start learning mine. And if you're sub 10, that's okay too, but I'd feel more comfortable if you were learning this after you get your Keyhole method down to about sub 8. The way my method works is that it combines the second and third step of the Keyhole method. So I'll show you what this looks like. I'm going to pick this tip because it already has an edge solved, and I'll solve this one. So what I see from here is the center orientation, so I have two pointing outwards, and I'm also going to take note of where this third edge is. So from there I actually know this case and any other case that I could come up with regarding the center orientations and the placement of the third edge. So during inspection, what I usually see is how to solve the first block, and then from there I'm going to figure out with those turns what the center orientation is going to end up being after I finish those two edges. And also I'm going to trace the third edge to see where it's going to end up on the puzzle. So from there, during inspection, I know after I've solved these two blocks, I know exactly what case I'm going to get, I know exactly which algorithm to perform. And that's why this method is so powerful, because during inspection, very quickly I can see everything up until the last three edges, which can be performed really quickly by the end of the solve. Now, there's only going to be a few different center orientation cases that you're going to run into, so I'll just start going into what those are. I just need to solve. Alright, so we have a block here. This is the first case. We have one center that's turned away, and I'm going to give all of these some pretty arbitrary names because there's no standard for center orientation naming. So I'm going to call this a one flip case, and not to be confusable with the one flip method. Whenever I'm talking about a case, I'm talking about center orientations. So this is a one flip center orientation case, and this is its mirror. So they're both the same thing, and the algorithms for any sort of mirror case is just mirrored, obviously. And so the next case, I'm going to call this the two flip case, and because there's two centers that are flipped and both pointing in the same direction. Alright, so this is also a two flip case. Notice how it's pointing in the opposite direction. Alright, I'm going to call this case the Chameleon case. We basically have two misoriented centers and they're both pointing in opposite directions. Alright, this is another case with two misoriented centers, and this is the Superman case. So they're both pointing towards you, or they're both on the same side at least. And so those are all of the cases that have two misoriented centers. And finally, we have a three flip case. So we have three misoriented centers that are all pointing in the same direction. and this is another 3 flip case that's all pointing in the other direction. Alright? Now the only other case I didn't go over is this one. This is the awkward case, and what this is we have 2 centers that are pointing towards each other, and the third is misoriented. And this is the other awkward case in the other direction. So those are all the cases you'll have to know. It's really not that much. The only one I didn't really go over is all 3 solved, which is usually pretty trivial. So yeah, from now I'll go on to how to solve these cases. Okay, so this is the 1 flip case. This is the first case where the edge is already solved. This is simple. You just solve this center and then insert the edge. Alright? This is another case where the edge is in the back of this flipped center, and all you do is solve the center, and obviously it'll be solved. What could also happen is, what's going to happen is when you solve this center, this edge is flipped, so when you solve it, it's going to be in the right place but wrong orientation. Normally what I do for this case is I solve it and I will flip it immediately with an edge from the third layer. Alright? Another case is when the edge is in the right place but it is flipped. So I always put this over the one center that needs to be oriented, and I solve the center and turn the tip in that same direction, so that way it's set up to insert. Let's see. Another case is when the edge is here, and notice how it's oriented properly, right? So if we were to solve the center, the edge would just end up on this other side of this edge of where it needs to go, so you can go straight into an insertion like that. Now when it's in the same position but flipped, what happens is I have no good way of doing this. I know I think there are algorithms for this, but I don't really use any. I just solve the center, rotate the tip, and put it in. Alright? And finally, if it's in the back here, if it's on the other side of this, what I normally do is I do a 3-move algorithm like that. The first one brings it here where it's oriented. I solve it and then fix the center. Now what happens is if you have a if you have a 1 flip case that's going the other way, so for example, I know that this turn will orient it, so I can't do it from this direction. Notice how if I try to do that same case this way, it's going to have the edge flipped. So the way I solve this is I always put the center this way, so that I know that if I orient, or if I put this edge here, I can solve it and then fix the center. So that's how I solve all the different cases for the 1 flip center orientation. Okay, so now on to the 2 flip case. There's 2 different kinds. It's either going to the left or to the right. I'll just show you one, and just know that going the other way, you have to mirror the algorithms, and it'll have the same effect. So this is the best case, in my opinion. This is actually what the 1 flip method revolves around, not the 1 flip case, the 1 flip method, where you have 2 solved edges and 1 flipped edge, and you just solve this one and this one. And notice how that solves the 2 misoriented centers and flips the edge in place, right? So that's the best case for this. Okay, this next case is this center in the back of these 2, so they're going in this direction, it's in the back here. And what happens is, notice how if you solve this center, it'll solve it. So the way to solve this is you solve this center first, and then you solve this center, and that ends up solving it. Alright. Now if it's misoriented, what I do is I just go ahead and solve these 2 in this order, then this one, and I know that this edge is going to end up here. So I do another turn on the top layer and solve it. Alright? Let's see. Now, when the edge is here, I notice that this edge can be solved like that. What I do for this case is I solve this center, and it turns into a one flip case, like that. Alright? Now when it's in the middle of these and it's incorrectly oriented like this, I just go ahead and solve this center, and it turns into a one flip case with a flipped edge. Alright? And finally, if this edge is here, what I do is, what do I do for this case? Okay, I would solve this center, then this center, because notice how when this edge is here, when the empty slot is here, and I solve this one, it's still oriented properly. So I would solve this one, and then it turns into one flip case, like that. Now if it's here, but oriented the other way, what I do is I do this turn here, and it turns into a Chameleon case, and this is actually the nicest case for the Chameleon case, which I will go into right now. So for the Chameleon case, like I said, this is the nicest case when you have these two pointing opposite each other, and the edge here is misoriented. What you do is you solve this center first, and then this edge becomes oriented to solve like that. All right. Now, if it's correctly oriented, what I normally do is I solve this center first, and it becomes a one flip case, like that. Now, if it's in the middle, what I always do is I just solve, I correctly orient it, and I solve the center. So I end up with one flip center that's another one flip case. So a lot of these end up just being simplifying into other cases that you already know. For this Chameleon case, the other one that you can come across is this. So you have a Chameleon here and a flipped edge here. So what you would do is you would orient one of the centers, and it turns into a one flip case where this one needs to go here, like that. Alright? And so those are all the cases, yes, those are all the cases for the Chameleon case. Now for the Superman case, this is also one of the better cases. You have two centers in the front, and the edge that belongs here is in the back here. So notice how if you solve this center, it'll fix this edge. So what you do is you solve this center first, and then this one second. Likewise, if you have two centers here, and this edge belongs here, you would solve this one first, and then solving this one finishes the centers plus that third edge. So that's what you do if it's in the back correctly oriented. If it's incorrectly oriented, I don't have a good way of doing this. What I do is I do this center first so that it becomes flipped, and then it's a one flip case where I solve this one and then insert correctly. Alright, so let's see, that covers when it's in the back. When it's in the front, this is actually a pretty nice case. Because it's symmetrical, you can choose. It's pretty easy to figure out how to do it. I always put in this edge so that it becomes misoriented. So, for example, that's not going to work because that actually solves it. I want to put it in this way, and what happens is this gives me a easy two flip case, like that. All right. So what this ends up looking like is that. Alright? Cool. And when you have the Superman case and the edge is flipped, what I do is I solve one center, and then that sets it up into a easy one flip case, like that. Alright? Now, there's only two different kinds of cases where there are three centers that are misoriented. So the easiest one to recognize is this one, because it's perfectly symmetrical. This is the 3-flip case. Now notice, this is the easiest case where you have a flipped edge, and what happens is, you know the 2-flip case where you solve this one, then this one, right? Well, to solve this one, you just go the other direction, because what you're going to end up doing is you solve the center, and this is ready to be solved here. Just in the middle, you want to fix this center, and then you can solve the rest, right? So quickly it just looks like that, right? Now, so that's what you do if it's in the top misoriented. If it's oriented, I usually go, and I'll show you. If it's oriented, and by the way, these cases that are oriented, they almost never come up, so I wouldn't bother learning them, and if they do happen, just intuitively solve. That's fine. So this one, I would go forward, and then I know this is a 1-flip case where I go like that. Okay? Now, the other case is when it's on the bottom, you only have two different kinds of cases because this is perfectly symmetrical. So whether it's here, here, or here, all you have to worry about, like, you can always just move this around and it'll change the position of this edge. So all you need to worry about is whether it's flipped or not. So in this case it's flipped. Notice how if I tried to solve it using the center, it would be flipped, which is nice because that solves this center and it turns into the nice 2-flip case here and here, right? So this one you would just solve going in the direction that the centers are pointing at. Now, if it's on the bottom and oriented, what I would do, this is a little more complicated. Well, actually not really, because you solve the center in the back. So the edge is here, which goes here. So I solve this center, which doesn't disturb this edge, and then I have a 2-flip case here, like that. So I would solve the center and then put it in like that. Or alternatively, let me set up the case again. Wow, that was right, okay. Or alternatively, you can solve the center, and then you have a 1-flip case where the edge is already solved. Alright? So those are all like 3-flip cases. Now for the awkward cases, there's a lot of these, but it's usually not too hard. The first case is when you have the edge in the right place but flipped. So you start with the top center here. Notice how this is a 2-flip. So what you would do is you solve this one, solve the other center that's not involved in the 2-flip, and then solve this last center. Alright? So that's what you do when it's here and flipped. When it's here in between these 2 flipped ones, and misoriented, this is an easy case. You just start here and go this way. So solve this one, and then solve this one. And you get this one solved. Alright? If it's here, so if it's in the same position, but oriented properly, like that, the way I do this is I just solve that edge. Okay? This is a case you should know. This is when you have an awkward case, and all three edges are solved. What I do, there's 2 ways of doing it. I forget what the other way is, but I'll show you what I do. I always start with this one. So the cases that are 2-flip, here, I would start with the one that's matching with the other one. So I would start with this one, and then go in that direction. So I would go here, here, here. Okay? So that's what happens when all 3 are solved. So to recap, when you have these 3 and this one is here, correctly oriented, you solve that, and then you get an awkward case going this way. Alright? Now when you have an awkward case here, and so we already know how to solve it if it's up here or in this position. If it's in this position, So if it's here, I always put this empty slot on this 2-flip edge, or on this 2-flip center, on the one that's in the front, and I say, okay, if this is correctly oriented like that, then I solve this center, and it turns into this case. Sorry, it turns into this case, which is the Chameleon case with a misoriented edge. So I just continue solving the centers, and it'll get solved. All right. So that's what happens when it's oriented. If it's misoriented, there's no good way of doing this, but it still goes pretty smoothly. Instead, I start solving the center as well, but instead I go the other way. And I know by the time I solve the third center, this edge is ready to be inserted with 4 moves. All right. So that's what I do when it's in this position. If it's in this position in the back here, like that, this is the easier case. So the edge is here, and if I were to put this empty edge here, notice how it's misoriented. Okay, that's a good thing. If I solve the center, I get a flipped edge with a 2-flip case, so you know how to do the rest. All right. If it's correctly oriented, there's no. Oh wait, there is a good way to do this actually. What I used to do was what did I used to do? Oh, I used to solve this center, and then this center, and then it ends up being right here. But recently I actually learned a better way to do this. Yes, so it's correctly oriented. What I do is, and this is an algorithm you're going to have to memorize, I set it up so that this can be solved in 1 move. And the first thing I do is I solve this center, which actually messes up this edge. And then I solve that one. And then with the last edge that's not solved, I fix the back center. So yes, those are all the cases for 3 edges misoriented. Just make sure you mirror it for the other direction when it looks like that, right? So when the center is pointing left. So for example, this edge is misoriented in relation to this. So what I would do is I would start with this center and solve the centers in that direction, and it solves this third edge. So those are all of the cases that you really need to know for this method. It's pretty simple. You just look at what the center orientation is going to be, you figure out where the edge is going to end up, and then from there you should know what exact moves you need to do to solve that edge plus those centers. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to use this method effectively. What I do during, let's move this symbol. That's a little better. So what I usually look for when I'm inspecting, and by the way, for Pyraminx, inspection is the most important part of the solve. If I don't do inspection, I'm gonna get 6 or 7 second solves pretty often. So what I would do, so like just looking at this, I already know what I'm gonna do. I always try to start with a tip that has 1 edge already solved, and if that's not possible, I try to start with an edge like this one, or a tip like this one where there's an edge that can be inserted pretty quickly. Alternatively, flipped edges are usually nice if you can solve the other 2. That's the 1-foot method, right? And you should know, by learning this method, you should know the 1-foot method too, because it incorporates that. You should know with a flipped edge and any center orientation, you should know how to solve any of those cases, right? So, where was I? In this, for example here, what I see is a tip that is an edge that is already solved. So I figure out a way to solve these. These are nice because this one goes here, that one goes there. It should remind you of the Oka method. Don't worry if you don't know how that works. But it's just 3 moves to solve any one. And the nice thing is with this, you'll know where the edge ends up. So I always try to predict what kind of a case I'm going to get, right? For example, if I insert it like this, I know already that this edge was going to end up here, correctly oriented with respect to this tip. So I know right away that I can do this, solve this tip, and then go ahead and finish with the rest of the solve. So that might be a little fast, and I guarantee you when I started using this, I practiced a lot just inspecting the puzzle, and usually when I first started, inspection would never be under 15 seconds. So I thought it was pretty much impossible to use this method effectively. But over time, if you practice and practice, you can actually get your inspection sometimes down to like 3 or 4 seconds, which sounds kind of ridiculous because I'm actually looking. It seems like I'm looking at a lot at a time, but when you start to get used to it, you start to be able to trace where the centers are going to be really quick, and you know what kind of a case you're going to get immediately. So for example, this one, I'm only tracing one piece. I know that as soon as I solve this, it'll be here with this center solved, easy case. I just have a flipped edge, which what I would do is flip it with one of the edges here, and then solve the last three edges, right? So yeah, make sure you practice your inspection. Practice visualizing how you would solve the first 2 edges, and from there try to visualize what kind of a case you're going to get so you can transition immediately into solving that case. That way, the only thing you have to do during your solve is figure out what your last 3 edges are and how to solve that, which should take less than a second, I would say.